Hey guys, it's Ellie. Welcome back to Bite Size Book of Mormon. I'm glad to have you with me. So, if you've never been here before, first of all, welcome. It's nice to have you. Second of all, this is just a podcast where we read through one chapter of the Book of Mormon each episode, and I give a little bit of insight, a little bit of comments, a little bit of jokes. So, stick around, it's a good time. So if you remember, last episode was a pretty brief chapter, 2 Nephi chapter 14. It was 6 verses, and it talked about how Zion will be redeemed at the last day. And I talked a little bit about the atonement, I talked about the temple, and it was a wonderful time. So go ahead and listen to that if you haven't already. But this week we're reading 2 Nephi chapter 15. So reminder, we're going to read the chapter summary, and then we're going to move on to the verses. So without any further ado, let's read 2 Nephi chapter 15. The Lord's vineyard, Israel, will become desolate, and his people will be scattered. Woes will come upon them in their apostate and scattered state. The Lord will lift an ensign and gather Israel. Compare Isaiah 5. So once again, this chapter is directly after the chapter that we just read. I'm pretty sure that's going to stay true for the rest of the Isaiah chapters. But once again, see if you can find some connecting threads between these chapters because they are adjacent in Isaiah's original writing, unlike some of the earlier chapters that we were quoting, like earlier in 1 Nephi and early 2 Nephi. But yeah, so I'm excited mostly for the last part where it says, the Lord will lift an ensign and gather Israel. For some reason, when I think of like God raising an ensign, I think of the Come Thou Fount hymn, which is one of the best hymns ever. I love that hymn. And even though it doesn't say the word ensign in it, it says Ebenezer in the verse where it says, here I raise my Ebenezer, here by thy great help I've come. And it's kind of the opposite. It's where we are the one raising the standard as opposed to God. But it's like, I don't know, it feels like a conversation. Like God's raising an ensign and we're raising our Ebenezer. So yeah, pretty neat. Such a good hymn. You should go listen to it. And then will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved, touching his vineyard. My well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill. And he fenced it, and gathered out the stones thereof, and planted it with the choicest vine, and built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a winepress therein. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem, and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, it brought forth wild grapes. So this is a very well-known analogy in the Book of Mormon. It's mostly in Jacob 5, where Jacob is quoting Zenos and his whole allegory of the olive tree. But the vineyard standing in for the people of Israel is not an uncommon thing. And wild grapes kind of means basically not what God wanted. God wanted good grapes, but wild grapes aren't good, you know? And so here basically what it's saying is that God planted this entire vineyard and took amazing care of it and did everything that he could, but it gave him wild grapes. And it's so cool. I love the question in verse 4 where it says, what more could I have done to avoid this happening? Like God, I feel like asks that about us all the time. Whenever we make mistakes, he's like, what more could I have done? He is trying everything. As Elder Kieran would say, he is in relentless pursuit of us. He is relentlessly trying to get us to be not wild grapes. And like I said, I just love the question that is posed. Like, what more could I have done? God is doing everything that he can do to make his people holy, to help them be righteous, to help them repent and come unto him, but they're not. And that must be endlessly frustrating because, like I've mentioned before, I can't even imagine the love that God has for his children, and to do everything in his power to help them and they still turn out unrighteous or stiff-necked or wicked. That must be endlessly frustrating. And not necessarily like disappointment or hate, but frustration, I feel like would be a very reasonable thing to feel in this moment if I were God. But of course I'm not God, so who knows? And now go to, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up, and I will break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. And I will lay it waste, it shall not be pruned nor digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah is his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, and behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry. Woe unto them that join house to house, till there can be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. In mine ears, said the Lord of hosts, of a truth many houses shall be desolate, and great and fair cities without inhabitant. Yea, 10 acres of vineyard shall yield 1 bath, and the seed of a homer shall yield an ephah. Woe unto them that rise up early in the morning, that they may follow strong drink, that continue until night, and wine inflame them. And the harp and the viol and the tabret and pipe and wine are in their feasts, but they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation of his hands. See, I think that's something really important to remember, is that having things is not inherently bad. And I've mentioned this a lot before in the previous chapters, but it says that these people have, tons of wine and feasts and harps and pipes and all these things. But the issue is not those things, but that they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation of his hands. So it's not just that they have things, it's that they're letting those things blind them and distract them from God and his operation in the earth. Therefore, my people are gone into captivity, because they have no knowledge, and their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst. Therefore hell hath enlarged herself, and opened her mouth without measure, and their glory, and their multitude, and their pomp, he that rejoiceth shall descend into it. So I like in the beginning of verse 14 where it says, hell hath enlarged herself, and opened her mouth without measure, because it reminds me of 3 Nephi 27:33. Which is obviously way later in the Book of Mormon. As you would expect, no, 3 Nephi is not after 2 Nephi. It is way close to the end of the Book of Mormon, which I think is kind of funny. But it says, straight is the gate and narrow is the way that leads to life, and few there be that find it. But wide is the gate and broad is the way which leads to death, and many there be that travel therein. So that reminds me of the principle that it's very easy to do bad things, and it's very difficult to stay on the straight and narrow, and it's very difficult to follow God's commandments in every way that we can. But I think it's also important to remember, like I've mentioned before many times, that God is merciful. Like, we don't need to be exactly perfectly on the straight and narrow when we die to get into heaven. And it's very vindicating to read that wide is the gate and broad is the way it leads down to hell, because it makes me feel less bad about not being that great of a disciple sometimes. Obviously, good, better, best. I'm not, fully, committing murder or anything, but, I feel less bad when it's difficult for me to do the completely right thing, or just difficult to do the best thing, rather. Because like it says here, broad is the way. So, like I said, a little bit vindicating. Still not a good thing that hell is opening its maw. And it says something about the people of Jerusalem that are kind of getting talked about here. But if you apply it to our life, then it's kind of vindicating. And the mean man shall be brought down, and the mighty man shall be humbled, and the eyes of the lofty shall be humbled. But the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment, and God that is holy shall be sanctified in righteousness. Then shall the lambs feed after their manner, and the waste places of the fat ones shall strangers eat. Woe unto them that draw iniquity with cords of vanity, and sin as it were with a cart rope. That say, let him make speed, hasten his work, that we may see it, and let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw nigh and come, that we may know it. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. I'm sure that currently you're thinking about examples in your own head about people or society or certain aspects of life where good is presented as bad and bad is presented as good. That happens a lot in today's society. Being religious is even considered bad. It's a very interesting world to live in. And I think it takes a very strong soul to be able to parse what is true and what is said by the world to be true. Because as the scripture says, they're sometimes literally opposite. Sometimes what the world says is great is literally the worst. But yeah, so living in this world is difficult because we have to have the skills, we have to have the spirit with us so we can parse. I mean, like I said, what is true, what is false. It's difficult sometimes. It's difficult. It's very easy to be pulled along just by what society tells you, but I think it's very important to sometimes just take a moment and reflect and really just think about what you believe and why you believe it. And that makes life a little bit more clear. Woe unto the wise in their own eyes, and prudent in their own sight. Woe unto the mighty to drink wine, and men of strength to mingle strong drink, who justify the wicked for reward, and take away the righteousness of the righteous from him. Therefore, as the fire devoureth the stubble, and the flame consumeth the chaff, their root shall be rottenness, and their blossoms shall go up as dust, because they have cast away the law of the Lord of hosts, and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. Therefore is the anger of the Lord kindled against this people, and he hath stretched forth his hand against them, and hath smitten them, and the hills did tremble, and their carcasses were torn in the midst of the streets. For all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. That phrase at the very end of verse 25 shows up a lot in Isaiah, and it is such an amazing phrase. I love that phrase, because it says, God is still angry. God is judging you. God knows that what you're doing is not ideal. It's not best. It's not even righteous in some cases. But his hand is stretched out still. He's still relentlessly pursuing you, as I mentioned, Elder Kieran would say. He's still reaching for you, despite knowing that what you're doing is wrong or not the best thing, you know? And he is still there. He's still reaching for you. Even though he's angry at you. No, okay, well, maybe I should reword that. Maybe not you. I'm just saying the hypothetical you, the hypothetical person, to be clear. But like, even if he's angry at someone, he's still reaching out for them. And that is such an amazing phrase. Because, like I said, it shows up everywhere in Isaiah. And it's so encouraging. Because in the midst of Isaiah totally condemning these people and saying all these things that they're doing wrong and all these terrible things that they're up to, he just stops and he says, God is angry, but he's still reaching for them. He's still reaching for the people of Israel. Even through all this crap that they're doing, even through all these sins that they're committing, all this wickedness that they're letting prevail, God still reaches for them. And we can go back to the beginning of the chapter where God says, what could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Like, what more can God do than just wait for you to reach out to him and grasp the hand that is already stretched out towards you? Sometimes it's our choice to turn to God and to clasp the hand that he has towards us. God can't force it. In fact, he won't force it. He refuses to force us to come unto him. But he is ready, and he's waiting, just for you. So that is why I love that phrase so much, just because it's so encouraging, and it's just a reminder that you cannot fall too far for God to reach you and lift you up again. You cannot. It is impossible. And that is such an amazing concept. I really, really love it. And he will lift up an ensign to the nations from far, and it will hiss unto them from the end of the earth. And behold, they shall come with speed swiftly. None shall be weary nor stumble among them. None shall slumber nor sleep, neither shall the girdle of their loins be loosed, nor the latchet of their shoes be broken. Whose arrows shall be sharp, and all their bows bent, and their horses' hooves shall be counted like flint, and their wheels like a whirlwind, their roaring like a lion. They shall roar like young lions, yea, they shall roar, and lay hold of the prey, and shall carry away safe, and none shall deliver. And in that day they shall roar against them, like the roaring of the sea. And if they look unto the land, behold darkness and sorrow, and the light is darkened in the heavens thereof. So this is one of those chapters where I know intellectually that Isaiah is writing basically poetry. Like, Isaiah, from what I hear, is a beautiful writer in his native language. And if you understand the cultural context and you understand a little bit of the native language that he's writing in, it is beautiful. And I feel so sad that I do not speak Hebrew, because this chapter sounded like it could be poetry. There were some parts that just seemed so poetic, but it didn't quite have the same effect that it would have if I was reading it in Hebrew. And that is so, so sad. But regardless, we were still able to get some awesome insight from this chapter, and you've already heard me talk all about my favorite parts. But the standout verse for this week will be verse 4, which, I've already talked about at length at the beginning of this chapter, but I'm going to read it again. It says, "What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, it brought forth wild grapes." I think that's such a human emotion from God. And obviously this is Isaiah writing messianically, writing, kind of in God's place. But to me it rings true. God does so much for us. And it must be frustrating when we just don't receive any of it. When we just ignore or don't see any of the work that he does with his hands every single day. Because he tries so hard to reach us and to help us reach him and to stretch forth his hand, like I mentioned. And ultimately, it's up to us whether or not we receive what he's giving us. Reception of his blessings is a choice. And grasping his hand, turning to him, is a choice that only we can make. My respect for God is definitely rekindled or revitalized when reading this, because he cares so much about us that he will give us agency no matter what. I talk about this so much throughout the chapters just because I love that God gives us basically unconditional agency. We can screw up in this life. In fact, we will screw up in this life, and he will let us. And there aren't any guardrails inherent to our lives that stop us from making bad decisions. But the commandments are guardrails that we choose to use. We don't have to follow the commandments, but we do, because we know what good they do for us. So, anyways, such a good chapter. Such cool insights. And it talks a lot about how God is reaching forth his hand, and he will not give up on the people of Jerusalem. Even though, according to Isaiah, they're doing really bad stuff, and they're kind of sucking right now. God still raises up an ensign and calls his people to him and reaches out his hand and works in his vineyard. Pretty awesome chapter, gotta say. So I think that's going to be the episode for today. Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to have you with me. And as usual, there's links in the show notes. One is for just a web version of the Book of Mormon for free, and the other two are different app downloads for the Book of Mormon. So if you do not have your own copy, whether digital or physical, go and click those links so you can get your own copy, because oh my goodness, it is so worth it to read along. Maybe not read along live while I'm reading it, but just read the Book of Mormon. It's a good thing to do. Makes your life better. Gives you daily insight into the gospel of Jesus Christ and into, a little bit of God's personality, which is pretty awesome. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.